Edwina, what a right royal mess.
Isn't it just, Mark? Do you know, I thought you'd have me on GB News tonight to talk about 40 years ago when I was first elected to Parliament, when we had a majority of 144, and it was the most glorious victory and fabulous night. And I tell you what, Margaret Thatcher would never have behaved as Boris Johnson has been behaving. Her standards were much higher. Her integrity was off the scale. And I'm afraid that she would have looked down her nose at what her successor has been up to today. I think it's an absolute disgrace. He should be ashamed of himself. He really should. That said, he's an entertainer. He's a member of a party of one. He doesn't care how much damage his wrecking ball does. He has an awful lot in common, I'm afraid, with President Trump in America, who doesn't care how much damage to his party his activities give, as long as he can in some way have revenge on those who criticize him. Now, you know, the whole thing, I'm afraid, is a tragedy. Boris has extraordinary abilities, Mark. I'm sure most people listening would agree with this. He has extraordinary abilities. He is a real personality, real character, hugely gifted when it comes to using words. The one thing he lacks is any kind of moral sense, any sense of duty, any sense of loyalty. When he's Prime Minister, by golly, he expected loyalty from everybody else, but he doesn't give it, does he? And I think that is such a tragedy and such a shame. It does make Rishi Sunak's life a lot harder, but in the end, your commentator who said that that Rishi will get elected again, the Tories will get elected again, as long as they deliver on what people really need and what they really want, I think that's correct.
And is Boris Johnson more of a threat to Rishi Sunak outside of the Commons than in it?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. In the Commons, he was always going to be, you know, another possibility for coming back into office. And that's always a permanent threat. But outside the House of Commons, to get back in, he'd have to persuade a third constituency after Henley and Uxbridge that he was going to serve them truly, hand on heart, and never leave them and do everything they want. And maybe third time they would actually realise they'd see through him. You know, selection committees are not stupid people. And they would say to him, yeah, well, you know, your record suggests exactly the opposite of what you are saying, Mr. Johnson. And meanwhile, actually, you can't afford to be an MP any longer. You can earn an enormous amount of money as a media personality and making speeches all around the world, especially in America. And you really have to toe the line rather more when you get to the House of Commons. So my suspicion is, and bear in mind as well, Mark, you were talking about your elderly parents earlier, who I think are probably younger than me. But bear in mind that Boris next year will be 60. That's getting on a bit if you are trying to get back into Parliament. No, I don't think he's going to be coming back in. And to be honest, I think much of the attack and much of the threat that he poses will fade, because what really matters is power. And power resides in number 10 Downing Street, which Rishi Sunak, I think, is wielding in a totally different fashion, much less histrionics. In fact, I would like him sometimes to produce a little more sparkle. But if he produces the goods as far as the economy is concerned, I think he'll win through.
Don't worry about golden oldies. Edwina, you have the energy and complexion of a teenager.
Well, thank you so much for that. Let's bear in mind the majority of members of the Conservative Party are probably older than I am. And hopefully many of them can remember the golden days when honesty and integrity and decency and really good economic policies, which took a long time to develop and took a long time to implement successfully, were in the hands of our woman Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. And we have a very, very good record to be proud of in the Tory party, and I've no doubt that we'll add to it at the next general election.
Well, let's talk about that, Edwina. Two quick ones before we let you go. First of all, does today's announcement by Boris Johnson that he's leaving the Commons have any implications for the outcome of the next election, first of all?
I'm not sure it does, to be honest, because there's nothing as an ex-MP. I mean, he is very much today's news, as was Nadine Dorries this morning. But look how quickly that faded. Once you've made that jump into the spotlight, the spotlight moves on. And other things and other issues become more important. I mean, frankly, I've spent far more time on Twitter today looking at what's happening in Ukraine, where the fate of the free world really is being decided, whereas Boris Johnson toddling around in his large shorts, as I can see on the screen at the moment, really is going to be yesterday's news. You know, we used to say you would use them to wrap the chips in, and he's already made himself yesterday's man. He was a very good prime minister in many, many ways, as he says himself boastfully in his letter. And if he had behaved himself a little bit better, he might still be prime minister, and he might be leading us into the next election and looking forward to victory in exactly the same way as Margaret Thatcher did 40 years ago.